Hello and welcome back to the Jacksonville History Show. I'm Emily Rutherford Liska, Executive Director of the Jacksonville Historical Society, and with me is Jacksonville native Tim Gilmore. And Tim, author, scholar, professor, you want to add anything to that? I might.
That's fine.
And you are indeed, and in fact, your recent book, it's called Stalking Otis Toole, A Southern Gothic, was published and launched just the end of September. And we're so fortunate to have you here to talk about not only that book, your latest book on Jacksonville's Otis Toole.
Pretty charming guy.
Not so charming of a guy. Someone we'd probably rather not claim, but is a significant part of the city's history. And you're also going to talk about some of the famous murders in Jacksonville over the past century. So let's start with your new book. And Stalking Otis Toole. And I want to make it clear for those people who've moved to Jacksonville within, say, the last 35 to 40 years, it is spelled O-T-T-I-S, Otis, pronounced Otis, not Otis or any other way. And those who've lived in Jacksonville a long time will remember that name from the news.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, people have pronounced it both ways quite a bit, but family members have called him Otis. John Walsh, who is the father of Adam Walsh, who is the most famous name connected to Otis Toole. Otis Toole is believed to have murdered Adam Walsh, a 6-year-old boy in South Florida in the early 1980s. John Walsh calls him Otis, and so it is pronounced often both ways, but Otis, I believe, is the correct way.
Well, go tell us about this very unusual man, Otis Toole.
Well, so what interested me in Otis Toole to begin with is that there are so many different versions of who he is. And he seemed to have this ability to listen and find out what people wanted of him and to kind of parrot that back. So if police came to him and said, you know, we have these files, do you know anything about this? He had a really, you know, he was not a very sharp guy, but he had this ability to pick out what they wanted and to give it back to them.
Low IQ?
Supposedly, you know, people said all the time, actually, when he was introduced, that his IQ was something like 75. You know, I don't know what that means. Certainly, he had some so-called street smarts about him, and I think he had an ability to, and really, I think, kind of a sad ability born from desperation to figure out what people wanted and to become what they wanted him to be.
How many murders is he connected with, whether he did them or not, and did he always accuse himself? I mean, did he step up and admit to these murders?
And it depends on who you ask. At one point, he and his partner in crime, Henry Lee Lucas, who is the better known name, supposedly had killed something close to 700 people. Police in Florida and Texas and other places had not investigated whether or not they would physically have been able to do this, and the Dallas Morning News in the mid-1980s did an investigation where they found out that if they did all of these murders, they would have had to have been in sometimes 4 or 5 places at one time. Some people believe that he only killed a couple of people. The Adam Walsh thing is still really charged. John Walsh believes that he did it, and he and says, you know, that he hopes Otis Toole rots in hell forever. Those are his words, understandably. But there are a lot of people who don't believe that he killed Adam Walsh either.
Now, I don't know if Otis's image has been up on the screen yet or not. I was not paying good attention. But if we can possibly pull that up again, there you go. This is Otis Toole. And we're talking about the 1970s, and his so-called escapades went for how long? What's the period there?
Well, you know, even that is hard to answer. The main activity seems to have been early 1980s, but he increasingly embellished his stories and took them back through the 1970s. He grew up in Springfield, and you know, what was at one time, of course, the most beautiful neighborhood in Jacksonville, and of course, since the time period that he grew up in Springfield has has really turned around in some amazing ways. And he lived in a number of boarding houses in Springfield, and he liked fire, and he set a number of houses in Springfield on fire. And that led to a house on East 2nd Street that he set on fire. A beautiful house built in the 1880s. And a man named George Sonnenberg, died in this fire. And that's what put Ottis Toole into jail, but from there into prison, because it turned into an arson murder trial.
Well, we're going to talk about, and we'll come back to this in a minute, because I want people to know how to get this book if they're interested. But let's talk, because you have explored, and I think a nice guy like you studying this topic, because you've explored a number of murders in Jacksonville, Florida, and you've also published any number of books. I'd say at least about 10 books.
I'm getting there.
You're getting there. Some on poetry, one on psychogeography, as I understand, kind of the
psychology of geography, so the psychology of place, and specifically in Jacksonville.
And in Jacksonville. People can find this on your website as well, which is called?
Which is www.jackspsychogeo, which is, again, psychology of geography. So it's jackspsychogeo.com.
Now we're going to move back to the 1890s. And in the 1890s, there was a sensational murder trial in Jacksonville, Florida. A beautiful young woman, wealthy because her father ran, you see it up on the screen now, the El Modelo cigar factory. That building was one of the few buildings that survived the Great Fire in the path, but roughly in the path, not exactly, but survives on Bay Street today as a law firm. And so you see that on the screen. Let's talk about the Louise Gatto murder trial for a minute.
Extremely sensational. Sensational just doesn't even really capture it. A murder trial. The reporting in the Times-Union was, I think it's safe to call it melodramatic. They called the trial a battle royal, and the person who was on trial for murdering Marie Louise Gatto was someone named Charlie Pitzer that she had been engaged to, and the newspaper made a lot of Pitzer's his behavior in court, and also of women coming to see him in the courtroom, and women bringing flowers to his prison cell.
Was the newspaper sort of anti-Pitzer then?
I don't know that it was anti-Pitzer. I think it's certainly he seemed to be, from their depictions, a pretty interesting character, which they played up.
And this was the Times-Union at the time.
This was the Times-Union, and supposedly, he came into court whistling, as the Times-Union said, a jaunty tune, and but he's a colorful character.
So, tell me something dramatic that happened during the trial.
As far as I can tell from the Times-Union articles, there were at least 4 people who swooned, who fainted, while the trial was going on, including Pitzer's mother, including women who came and were, for whatever reason, smitten with Pitzer, and including the defense attorney, Alexander St. Clair Abrams, who his closing speech lasted for 6 hours.
Wow.
And ended with his collapsing, and supposedly he was revived behind, in the judge's chambers, and was kind of delirious and thought he was still giving his speech.
Well, high drama of the 1890s.
Right.
We're going to move on fairly quickly now, and there are several other murders. In fact, you are going to present to the Jacksonville Historical Society, sign your new book on Ottis Toole. Then you'll present on a century of murders in Jacksonville called Malice, Aforethought, a century of Jacksonville murders.
Right.
And another one you're going to hit, this guy's called the Casanova Killer, and I think we have an image of him. There he is. He's not a bad-looking dude for the times. What were the times there?
The times were
70s?
Exactly.
60s, 70s?
Were the early 70s.
Yes.
And so his name was Paul John Knowles, and he was certainly a sociopathic character. And he got this nickname because he frequently picked women up in bars, and
I'm so worried I had a date with him back then. I was looking at the picture. Go ahead.
Well, I'm glad you're here to talk about it, so probably you didn't.
Oh, whoa.
He the woman who is, there's the small inset photograph in that image. Her name was Sandy Fox, and she was a British journalist who was smitten with him and had this kind of feeling like her relationship with him was her real American experience. And so she wrote a book that had 3 or 4 different names depending on what edition it was in, but one of the names was In Love with a Serial Killer. But he's most remembered now for actually really sad for the murder of 2 sisters, Mylette and Lillian Anderson, on the north side in the Pumpkin Hill area.
Oh, gee.
And
how awful.
they were never found. He confessed to having murdered them, and their father never believed that they were actually dead. He waited for their phone call for the rest of his life.
Very sad story.
It is.
We have just a moment to touch on the Johnny Mae Chapel murder. Just a moment, and then here's an image up on the screen.
Yeah,
tell us in a few sentences,
if you can. I think the racial tension and race riots in the 1960s in Jacksonville, although we talk about Axe Handle Saturday, have still not really been talked about enough. And so in 1964, in the midst of race riots in Jacksonville, 4 young white men said they wanted to go find a black person to kill. And they went driving, they were drinking, and they had, at least 1 gun in the car. And they saw this woman on the side of the road in New Kings Road, and they shot her. And their defense was they were just having fun. They didn't mean to kill anybody. They were just driving around drinking and shooting guns, Dukes of Hazzard style, I suppose.
And you'll be talking about these stories and more at the Jacksonville Historical Society on Wednesday, October the 30th.
Right.
And you'll be signing your new book.
I will.
And
yes,
you have a couple of other books, too, that we may have there. And you also have an appearance in Springfield, home of Otis. And when is that appearance? December?
Well, that's actually tonight.
Oh, tonight.
And I think this airs tomorrow.
And then you have...
I will be at Chamblin's Uptown on December 11th. I'll do a reading
December 11th at Chamblin's Uptown.
Right.
So people can catch you at the Jacksonville Historical Society, October 30th, Chamblin's Uptown, December 11th. And go on those websites to find out more. And tell us your website, because you've got a good one.
Yeah, it's jackpsychogeo.com. I realize that may be kind of hard to, but it's the psychology of geography is what the portmanteau word is there. So Jack Psychogeo, and there are more than 200 stories about different places around Jacksonville on the site.
Or find you by putting in Tim Gilmore.
That will work.
I want to thank everybody for listening, and for now, we're history. Thanks so much.